For 26 years, Eliza Morgan was more than a teacher. She was a lifeline. In classrooms overlooked by budgets and bureaucracy, she gave students a reason to believe in themselves and a reason to return the next day. She stayed late, bought supplies with her own money, showed up after surgeries, mentored kids who'd been written off. Her impact didn't come with fanfare, but it echoed in college admissions, job offers, and graduation stages. Then one day, without warning, the district cut her loose. 10 days before her full pension. They called it restructuring. But Eliza knew what it was, a quiet erasure of loyalty disguised as numbers on a spreadsheet. That day she broke. Quietly. Privately. Classroom she once filled with energy stood silent. The hallway whispers weren't sympathy, they were fear. Fear it could happen to them next. But grief didn't hold her for long. Because Eliza Morgan had spent her life teaching others how to rise, and now it was her turn. What they took was financial. What they provoked was personal. She had nothing left to lose, and that's when she became unstoppable. Eliza Morgan was never the loudest voice in the room, but hers was the one students remembered. 52, she carried the calm conviction of someone who had nothing left to prove. In the halls of Lincoln High, she wasn't just respected, she was trusted. Not for strict discipline or flashy methods, but for her quiet consistency. For the way she saw every student, especially the ones others didn't. She taught literature, yes, Shakespeare, Baldwin, Morrison, but her real lessons were on courage, on speaking up, on never shrinking for anyone's comfort. Students came to her class expecting essays and left with a sharper sense of who they were. She challenged them to think critically, to question power, to write with fire. Her room was a haven, one of the few spaces in the building where kids could breathe, be angry, be vulnerable, and still be safe. Some said she saved lives. Eliza just said she did her job. She didn't take summers off. Every year, she ran free writing workshops for students who couldn't afford enrichment programs. She paid for snacks, notebooks, even transportation without asking for credit. Awards came, Teacher of the Year, district honors, community recognitions, but she never hung them in her classroom. "It's their names that matter," she once said, pointing to a wall of student essays. What her colleagues admired most wasn't her accolades, it was her resilience. 2 years ago, Eliza was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. She finished her last class on a Friday, began chemo that Monday, and was back in the classroom just 3 months later, hair thin but spirit intact. When asked why she came back so soon, she simply said, "They still need me." Administrators praised her publicly, sent out newsletters with her name bolded in appreciation, until one day they didn't. She had been a pillar, a standard, kind of teacher students remembered decades later. But in the eyes of a new administration focused on cost-cutting and performance metrics, she had become a number. A high-salary line item nearing retirement. Inconvenient. Replaceable. But Eliza didn't know that yet. Not here in this moment. Not as she helped a student revise a college essay after school, or spent her weekend grading drafts with handwritten notes of encouragement. She still believed she was part of something bigger, still believed that loyalty went both ways. She had given everything to her school. Her talent, her time, her health. What she didn't know was that the institution she'd fought for all her life was about to turn its back on her. And the silence would be deafening. Change rarely announces itself kindly. For Eliza Morgan, it came in the form of a new superintendent, young, polished, and ambitious. His resume boasted results. Graduation rates up. Budgets trimmed. Efficiency lauded. But beneath the jargon of modernization and fiscal optimization, something quieter and colder was taking root. He didn't see education as a calling. He saw it as an equation. And in his equation, experience cost too much. Passion couldn't be measured. Loyalty couldn't be budgeted. So he started replacing it. Slowly, the shift began. Seasoned educators, the kind who remembered students' names years later, were quietly let go. In their place came short-term hires, cheaper, younger, unprotected. Contracts became temporary. Class sizes grew. Support services shrank. Eliza noticed the pattern. Not immediately, but over weeks. Staff room conversations grew tense. Retirement parties became whispers of warning. Veteran teachers gone without a word. She asked questions. Not loudly, not rudely, just honestly. She wanted to understand. She wanted transparency. Then, in late spring, she asked the new administrator about her renewal. The question was simple. Will my contract be extended for next year? The response came 3 days later, behind a closed door. They said it with smiles and rehearsed regret. They said they were moving in a new direction, that her role had been reassessed, that it had nothing to do with her performance. But Eliza understood the subtext. 18 days. That's how close she was to qualifying for full pension. 26 years of service, and she was cut off before the finish line. Not because she failed, but because she cost too much. It wasn't a layoff. It was an erasure, calculated and clean. That moment wasn't loud. There were no arguments, no protests, just a hollow silence that followed her out of that office. Her keycard still worked for one more day. She walked the halls like a ghost, pausing at lockers she once helped students claim as safe space. It hurt more than she expected. Not the job loss, but the message behind it. That people like her, the ones who gave everything, were now seen as expendable. And yet, something in her didn't break. Stirred. Because Eliza Morgan had never taught students to surrender to systems. She taught them to question, to push back, to speak up. And now she would do the same. Not as an employee, but as a force. Under a low, persistent cloud of betrayal, Eliza Morgan refused to disappear quietly. She had spent her career teaching students to question injustice, and now she was living her own lesson. Instead of mourning the job she lost, she began documenting the truth behind it. Every email, every meeting, every casual conversation that hinted at something deeper. She kept notes like a journalist, timestamps like a lawyer. Soon she noticed a pattern, not just in her story but in others. Within weeks of her dismissal, 3 other veteran teachers, all within a year of full pension, had been restructured, reassigned, or told their roles no longer existed. Their replacements? Younger, cheaper contract hires with no long-term security and no access to retirement benefits. Eliza reached out. Quietly at first. Coffee shop meetings, encrypted messages, late-night calls. Each of them had a similar experience. Each felt blindsided, devalued, erased. Together, they began piecing together a mosaic of manufactured attrition, and at the center of it all, a line buried in an internal email. Target, $1.2 million reduction from legacy retirement obligations by Q3. That line became their rallying point. They filed a joint legal complaint. It wasn't just about jobs, it was about the system that treated people as liabilities the moment they became expensive. Their case wasn't just legal. It was moral. And they didn't stop there. They reached out to a small, independent newspaper known for investigating local corruption. One of the teachers had a former student working there. The first article appeared quietly. A headline tucked beneath local politics and sports scores. But it struck a nerve. Former students, parents, and even fellow educators began reaching out. Some in support. Some in fear. Some just to say thank you. But not everyone was cheering. Colleagues urged Eliza to let it go. That she was risking her reputation, her future prospects, her peace. That maybe it wasn't worth the fight. She listened, respectfully, calmly, and then doubled down. 'Cause for her, silence was complicity. And if she didn't speak, who would? This wasn't a rebellion. It was a reckoning, quiet, methodical, undeniable. Eliza wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for the value of a lifetime of work. For every late night, every lesson plan, every student who had ever needed someone to believe in them. And this time she believed in herself. The ripple became a wave. What began as a quiet article in a local paper soon captured national attention. More media outlets picked up the story, curious about how a respected teacher with decades of service could be so easily discarded. But it wasn't just Eliza's story anymore. As the article spread, teachers from other cities, even other states, began sharing eerily similar experiences. Forced retirements, last-minute contract changes, promotions dangled then withdrawn, all pointing to one thing: a system shaving off experience to balance budgets. The stories poured in, not in anger but in heartbreak. Teachers who had given everything, only to be left behind just before they could retire with dignity. The hashtag Honor Our Teachers began circulating on social media. What started with a few impassioned posts exploded into a nationwide conversation. Former students, parents, community leaders, and even celebrities began sharing their stories and their outrage. Then came the moment no one expected. A video surfaced on Eliza's behalf, not made by her but by those she'd taught over the decades. It was simple. Just a series of short clips, voices from different eras, different backgrounds, all saying the same thing: "Thank you, Ms. Morgan." They spoke of her kindness, her strength, her belief in their potential when no one else saw it. Of how she taught them not just literature or history but how to think, how to speak up, how to fight when something is wrong. That video hit millions in less than 48 hours. It was no longer just a story about budgets and school boards. It became about legacy, about the invisible impact of a teacher, about how we measure value not just in salaries but in lives changed. Under growing pressure, the school board convened an emergency meeting. The media waited outside. Protesters lined the sidewalks. Parents showed up with hand-painted signs. Former students brought flowers. What was once a personnel decision had become a public reckoning. Within days, a board member resigned, citing personal reasons, though no one believed it. The lawsuit, now bolstered by public support and backed by a legal advocacy group for educators, was fast-tracked for trial. And still, Eliza remained steady. Not triumphant. Not vengeful. Just clear. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. And fairness. And respect for a life's work. Courtroom wasn't just a legal battleground, it was a symbol. Of every teacher who stayed late, went unpaid, worked through illness, mentored in silence. Their sacrifices had finally found a voice. And that voice had become too loud to ignore. The verdict was clear. After weeks of deliberation, hearings, and testimonies, the court ruled in Eliza's favor. The district was ordered to fully reinstate her retirement benefits, issue a formal apology, and clear her record. The headlines were everywhere: "Teacher wins landmark case against school district." News anchors spoke her name with reverence. Legal analysts called it a precedent. For many educators across the country, it felt like justice, long overdue and deeply personal. Yet when the school board extended an offer for her to return, Eliza declined. Not out of bitterness, not to prove a point, but because she understood something had shifted. She was no longer just a teacher at the end of her career. She had become a symbol of resilience, of standing firm. And now she carried a new responsibility. With quiet determination, Eliza turned the spotlight away from herself and towards something larger. Drawing on the momentum of the public outcry and the network of support that had grown around her, she established the Second Bell Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting veteran educators who had been pushed aside, silenced, or quietly removed before reaching their full retirement benefits. The name carried weight. The Second Bell, a metaphor for those who had already answered one call and now needed the chance to be heard again. The foundation offered legal resources, counseling, and advocacy for teachers navigating the same cruel patterns she had endured. Created a space where silence was replaced by stories, where invisibility gave way to action. Soon, what began as a small effort in her local community expanded into a national movement. Retired teachers volunteered to mentor younger ones. Workshops were created to educate staff about their rights. Law students from across the country began interning with the foundation, eager to contribute to a cause that now felt urgent and real. Eliza didn't seek credit. She didn't need applause. Her satisfaction came in watching others stand a little taller, speak a little louder, fight a little smarter. Each letter of thanks she received reminded her that this chapter, this second bell, mattered just as much as the first. And in quiet moments she sometimes returned to the school grounds, not to enter but to observe. The laughter of children, the rustle of backpacks, the familiar rhythm of school life. It didn't sting anymore, because she had left on her own terms. And more importantly, because she had left something behind that would outlive her tenure. She had rewritten the ending, not just for herself but for countless others. In the end, the lesson was simple. Respect isn't something that fades with age. Experience isn't a liability. And justice, even when delayed, can still arrive with purpose.